Welcome to the Explainer. So to kick things off today, I want you to imagine a really bizarre financial scenario. What if your household income suddenly jumped by a staggering 20% this month, but at the exact same time, your bank account ended up with its biggest financial shortfall in 6 months? You'd probably panic, right? You'd be frantically checking your receipts, trying to figure out where the leak is. It sounds completely backward, doesn't it? Like, how on earth can you earn record-breaking money and still fall deeper into the red? Well, believe it or not, that exact economic paradox just played out for the entire country of India.
Here is exactly what happened. India's merchandise exports shot up by an unprecedented 19.6% in July. That pushed us over the $44 billion mark. I mean, that is our strongest export surge in 4 years. Huge win, right? But right behind that remarkable victory came a massive shocker. Our trade deficit actually widened to a 6-month high of nearly $32 billion. Today, we're breaking down this major piece of economic news. This isn't just high-level data that only bankers care about. This is the exact math that determines how much you pay to fill up your scooter, how much your next smartphone will cost, and what jobs will be available for college graduates next year. Okay, let's dive into this. The Ministry of Commerce and Industry recently released India's official foreign trade data for July, and the contrast is absolutely fascinating. When you look at the total picture, combining both our physical goods and our services, our total monthly exports crossed a triumphant $80 billion. That is literally a monumental achievement for Indian industry. But here is the catch. At the exact same time our export ships were sailing out, our merchandise imports, the physical goods we bought from other countries, surged to $76.22 billion. So, when the dust settled on just the physical goods traded, it blew open a massive monthly trade deficit of $31.98 billion. Now, before we go any further into the mystery of these numbers, let's quickly get our baseline facts down. Think of international trade as this giant, interconnected global exchange system. When Indian factories make things like smartphones and sell them to buyers in the US or Europe, that's an export. Crucially, foreign buyers pay Indian businesses in US dollars, which brings really valuable foreign currency into our banking system. Because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, it kind of acts like the ultimate global scorecard for trade. On the flip side, when India buys raw crude oil from Saudi Arabia or specialized microchips from Taiwan, that is an import, and India has to spend its US dollars to get them. When you subtract what a country exports from what it imports, you get the trade balance. Basically, if we import more goods than we sell to the rest of the world, meaning we're spending more dollars than we earn, we end up with a trade deficit. Let's use a super simple, real-world analogy. Imagine you run a thriving neighborhood bakery. This month, your sales go completely through the roof. You sell thousands of delicious cakes and bring in 44,000 rupees in total revenue. Fantastic news, right? But because your bakery is booming, you had to buy enormous bags of expensive imported cocoa, commercial ovens, and fuel just to keep your stoves running. Your total supply bill comes out to 76,000 rupees. So, even though you had your absolute best sales month of the year, you spent 32,000 rupees more on raw ingredients and machinery than you took in from selling those cakes. That gap right there, that's your deficit. For a growing country like India, running a physical trade deficit isn't necessarily a failure, though. It often reflects an incredibly hungry economy that's aggressively building its infrastructure. But if that gap widens too fast, it risks putting immense pressure on our national currency. So, let's look at the positive side of this ledger first, because there really is a lot to celebrate here. India's merchandise exports jumped an incredible 19.63% to reach $44.24 billion. To truly put that into perspective, this is our fastest export growth rate since all the way back in June 2022. Our factories are humming, our global trade routes are highly active, it means shipping containers are packed to the absolute brim, and our ports are working overtime to send Indian-made goods overseas to very eager international buyers.
And exactly what are we selling to the world? Well, we have some real export superstars. Engineering goods rose by 18% to over $12 billion, largely powered by a really swift rebound in trade routes across West Asia and growing demand over in the United States. Refined petroleum, that jumped a stunning 67% to nearly $7 billion. Now, what's really interesting here is one category that is climbing dramatically: electronics. Shipments of electronic goods surged by over 57% in July to reach nearly $6 billion. That is a real game changer for an economy that historically relied super heavily on software and agriculture.
And that 57% surge in electronics is heavily driven by one specific device that we all hold in our hands every single day. The government highlighted that, fueled by manufacturing schemes like the production-linked incentive, India has officially transformed into the world's second-largest mobile phone manufacturer. Just think about this monumental transformation for a second. A decade ago, mobile phones were our 153rd largest export product. They barely even registered on the national scale. Today, manufactured smartphones have become India's single largest individual export product. It is a stunning victory for Indian manufacturing, proving that we can definitely attract top-tier global supply chains.
But this brings us right back to our central mystery. So, if our assembly lines are running hot, and we are sending record numbers of smartphones across the globe, how did our national bakery still end up in the red? Why did the trade deficit widen to a 6-month high of $31.98 billion despite such incredible export success? Well, the answer really comes down to an insatiable national appetite. Let's break down our tremendous import bill. In July, our total merchandise imports surged by 17.52% to hit that $76.22 billion mark. Leading the charge? Raw crude oil. Because of ongoing geopolitical conflicts and maritime tensions in the Middle East, global crude prices were pushed way higher. As a result, our crude oil import bill jumped 17.6% to $18.31 billion in just a single month. Literally every single barrel cost us more foreign exchange. Plus, to feed those booming factories we just celebrated, Indian companies had to import vast quantities of industrial chemicals, coal, and over $14.6 billion worth of intermediate electronics and machinery from China alone. To put that simply, we are importing the raw microchips, batteries, and screens from China so we can actually assemble them into the finished smartphones that we then export. But thankfully, there is a crucial shock absorber that keeps India's overall economic ship steady. And this brilliantly illustrates the true power of India's modern economy. While our physical goods trade had that scary $32 billion gap, our powerhouse services sector totally came to the rescue. India's software exporters, tech consultants, and financial service firms brought in an estimated $35.89 billion in services exports. After subtracting what we spent on foreign services, India generated a tremendous services trade surplus of $17 billion. That brilliant services surplus acted like a giant cushion, cutting our total overall national deficit down to a much more manageable $15 billion. Our digital workforce is literally out there balancing the national checkbook.
Now, let's walk through how this directly impacts you and me. When India's physical merchandise deficit widens to $32 billion, our banking system is forced to buy billions of US dollars to pay all those foreign oil and goods suppliers. This creates a really fascinating cause and effect loop. As demand for the US dollar rises, it puts downward pressure on the Indian rupee, causing it to weaken. And once the rupee weakens against the dollar, anything India imports, like that crude oil or those electronic components, becomes slightly more expensive to buy. That creates subtle inflationary pressure. This is exactly why you might suddenly notice your weekly groceries or your daily bus fare creeping up by a few extra rupees. It all tracks back to this global currency tug-of-war.
But the impact on everyday people isn't just about rising prices, it's also about incredible opportunity. The fact that electronic exports surged 57% proves that global tech giants are aggressively expanding their factory footprints right here in India. For young Indians, this means thousands of new, high-skilled manufacturing, quality testing, and supply chain jobs are being created. It means a recent engineering grad in Karnataka or a skilled assembly worker in Uttar Pradesh suddenly has global tech giants fighting to hire them. We are seeing major hiring booms in industrial corridors across states like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Uttar Pradesh, and Gujarat. This trade data isn't just numbers on a page, it represents real paychecks and real career paths, moving our youth into modern hardware assembly.
So, the crucial point is understanding the urgent national challenge this data reveals. We are doing a great job assembling billions of dollars worth of finished smartphones and cars for global export. But, as our import bill clearly shows, we are still relying heavily on billions of dollars worth of raw components, chips, and chemicals imported from countries like China. This is why something called deep-tier localization is so profoundly important. Multi-billion-dollar national initiatives in domestic semiconductor manufacturing, deep-sea oil exploration, and local chemical synthesis are absolutely critical. Until we start making the raw batteries and microchips on our own soil, our economy will always be somewhat vulnerable to the price tag set by other nations. We have to make the raw parts ourselves to permanently balance our trade sheets.
To wrap it all up, the July trade performance paints a really fascinating picture of duality. On one hand, we have a record-breaking manufacturing export engine firing on all cylinders, proving India can absolutely compete on the highest global stages in electronics and engineering. On the other hand, we face the sobering reality of high energy import bills and volatile global oil prices. It is a story of great industrial progress paired directly with the reality of energy dependence,
and it requires continuous vigilance to ensure our economic growth remains completely stable.
Which brings me to a final thought for you to ponder. Now that you've seen the full picture of how our trade balance works, I want to hear from you. Do you think our booming electronics exports will soon grow large enough to completely wipe out our oil import deficit? Or will our immense thirst for energy imports always keep this trade gap open? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I will see you next time.